So what are the reasons then of capturing this lineage? The lineage detail and what level of detail for each one of those main reasons to document the overall process. So if you're trying to understand data lineage for a particular piece of data, so this obviously has value, this is where the most detail becomes important. So I'm trying to understand, I'm looking at a piece of data here, and I'm trying to understand where it came from and how did it get here and what transformations happened to it, because I don't understand what it is or whatever. So tracing that back to the sources with as much detail as possible to promote clarity, transparency, and quality. So this is the point where having lineage to satisfy this question can be really important. The next is this issue of I've got a bunch of integrations and data flows throughout my whole organization, and I'm in charge of managing them, and I need to understand as much as I can about them. So if there's a problem, or if I switch out a system, I need to or I need to be able to test and validate and support those. So detailed lineage can show the mapping and processing information to support the maintenance or the recreation of the process. But it may be okay not to have that level of detail, just to know about the existence of them, know where it's coming from, what sort of data it is, so that if I really need to go support it, I can figure out all that stuff by getting in. If I have access to the code, I can figure all that out, and maybe I don't need to have all that detailed information in the tool, because it's only when there's a problem or I need to rewrite something do I need to find out details, and at that point I'm going to have access to the code anyway. But it depends on really how discoverable that process is. The next is the important thing around really dealing with policies or management of policies and privacy and security. So if it's sharing or privacy, we talked about that. So in order to really understand, I've got a data flow that's going from this system to that system. If I'm trying to understand, does this require a sharing agreement? Is there privacy constraints or issues with this? I really need to know what data is in there and where it's going and what's moving from here. So is it including social security numbers? Is it including names and birth dates? And that's going to treat it differently. So just those high-level process information may not be sufficient. Now, for this purpose, it's probably not important that I understand any sort of transformations or context. It's most important that I understand what data is flowing and whether or not that data is has certain policy attributes associated with it. The next, again, is a fairly high-level thing, understanding the architecture and interconnectingness. So, you've got all this point-to-point processes, and I want to see where all the touch points are for sort of testing and change management. And this is maybe sufficient to do this at the process-to-process or functional area to functional area kind of management. The biggest example of this is we've been working with some customers recently who are moving their primary ERP to the cloud, right? And they have all these integrations that feed into it, and they need to know, like, how do we test all these? How do we, if they're not having to rewrite it, they're not really caring so much about the values, but they want to understand. They need to validate that it's all still working and that they've changed, that it's pointing to everything new, right? So the impact of that kind of stuff can be important. The next is this concept of inventory or documentation of vendor-provided APIs for the import-export. So I purchased a solution, they've got a bunch of APIs. I need to understand, like, well, what are those APIs and how does that, what kind of transformation or business logic happens when it gets loaded into the system, or I'm pulling data out. So this may be okay to just have sort of informational or conceptual mapping, or maybe not even have that much detail as long as I've got a good explanation about what those fields are. But the more your vendor can provide you with the underlying details about how APIs or batch processes do transformations and processing when they loads in your system, the better they are for transparency. And we talked about advanced curation. When we talk about data flow, it's more about things process level. Is this a good report or a bad report or policy? I think there is a level of advanced curation that you can do on Lineage, which is that whatever kind of automatic discovery that you do from an existing process may have limited trustability, or the machine calculations of that. Probably might need some sort of human eye to review and make sure it makes sense, or of course then to connect the maybe things to glossary definitions, and also expose its like hidden context or selections, as I mentioned. You might say, oh, it's not obvious from this straight up mapping that this is only pulling data that's 30 days old or something. And then managing requests. This is the last reason for documenting, and this is probably the easiest and best way to do this, is that anything new that you're building, a new request or a new integration or a new data feed or any of these new processes, if you can build the sort of mapping from a requirement standpoint and the transformations and everything, that curation activity, that's going to inform someone who's going to go develop. So you get enough documentation of that information to feed someone. And if you're doing that as part of a request process, it doesn't matter whether or not how discoverable that is in the past, because you've pulled all that information up front and you've got all rich detail from a request standpoint. So there's the sort of purposes of having Lineage. And again, why am I going into all this detail? It's about making sure that you understand, like, where you should focus your energy on, either, you know, going through manual curation of this information, or making sure that you can get high quality automated discovery and consumption of the mappings.